Hey guys, welcome to digit.in. Now, you guys have been asking us relentlessly for a review of the G14. Actually, most of you have been asking when is the G14 coming to India. So, well, it's finally here and here's our review of this machine. Now, before we go ahead, I have two recommendations for you. One, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button on our channel, obviously. And two, grab a snack because this is going to be a long one. This review is actually going to cover a lot of aspects about this laptop because there's a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about gaming performance, we're going to talk about creative workloads, we'll talk about thermals and the thermal performance, we're going to talk about Armoury Crate, the internals, the display, the keyboard, trackpad. So it's definitely going to be a long review. Now that that's out of the way, let's quickly begin. Right off the bat, the first thing I want to talk about are the specs. Now the G14 is powered by the Ryzen 4000 series of processors, and you have an option of Ryzen 5, 7 and 9. If you choose a Ryzen 7 or a Ryzen 9 processor, you get the HS series, which is basically slightly underpowered in comparison to the regular 8 series, so that you can actually fit it into a chassis this thin. You still get your 8 cores, 16 threads. With the Ryzen 9 4900HS, you get 3 GHz of base clock speed and 4.3 of boost. That's still pretty impressive. You have an option of various NVIDIA GPUs to select from, and there's of course 2 RAM configurations and multiple choices for storage. Now the machine that we're reviewing today has the following specs. It's powered by the Ryzen 9 4900HS processor. It's got an NVIDIA 2060 Max-Q GPU, 16 gigs of RAM on board, a 512 GB NVMe Intel S660p drive, and it has a 1440p display with a refresh rate of 60 Hz. You can choose a 1080p panel with a refresh rate of 120 Hz as well, but this is the one with a higher resolution and lower refresh rate. Well, it's suitable for certain kind of users for sure. Let's talk gaming on this thing, first and foremost. So typically our review process involves us testing 5 to 6 popular titles on every machine with various graphic settings. For the G14, we went a little above and beyond because we really wanted to see where does this machine break down. So we chose a dozen popular games including Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Battlefield 5, Overwatch, CSGO, so a wide gamut of games, and tested those games at both 1440p and 1080p. Not just that, we also decided to set the graphics to the highest possible and one below highest in both those resolutions. The results were actually quite surprising. Now do note that this is a 60 Hz panel, so as long as we're getting 60 FPS on all of the games across all of the settings, you're pretty fine. It's golden because you don't have screen tearing, because you'll have VSync on, etc. For example, Call of Duty Modern Warfare at 1440p with ultra graphics gave us an average FPS of 57, whereas the ultra graphics in 1080p gives us a frame rate of 83 FPS. That's higher than what the panel can offer. However, if you were to choose the same configuration but with a 1080p panel and 120 Hz refresh rate, you can expect a much better experience, like a 83 FPS solid. And of course, if you drop the graphics from ultra to high, then you have 96 FPS over there. Games like Doom Eternal really relish this hardware because we noted about 110 FPS average in the 1080p setting at highest graphic settings. So overall, game-wise, you can see, of course, all of the numbers on the screen. It's definitely impressive. If you're looking for an impressive gaming machine, this one does check the right performance boxes. Moving on from gaming to creative workloads. Now, our standard test involves Adobe Premiere and Adobe Lightroom. What we do is from Premiere, we take our 4K project and export it into a 4K and a 1080p video file in 5 minutes and 20-minute clips. Now, in both of those test scenarios, the G14 manages to achieve the task in times faster than any machine we've tested so far. A 5-minute render takes 2 minutes 39 seconds, and this is in 4K, and a 20-minute 4K export takes 13 minutes only, which is extremely impressive. This is with hardware encoding enabled, and when doing so, we see the CPU with its all 8 cores and 16 threads getting used to the max. the memory gets maxed out, and the GPU also comes into play. So overall, Premiere does leverage all of the hardware that's in here to give you as fast render times as possible. Moving on from Premiere and on to Lightroom, if you've got a large catalog of images to export, we normally export batches of 50, 100, 250 and 500 RAW files, all shot on the Nikon D850. So these are very high resolution RAW files. And once again, we saw some of the fastest render times we've seen on a gaming laptop so far. What really makes this impressive is that, for example, 50 RAW files are exported in under a minute and 20 seconds. And that's really impressive when you take into account the fact that this is actually a super slim gaming laptop. It's thin, it's 14 inches in size, and overall is just absolutely fabulous. So these render times are super fast, and overall, once again, really no complaints there because it's just very damn right impressive. Now, where things do get a little murky is thermals. This machine, being as small as it is and being built of solid aluminum through and through, means it runs hot. Like, the surface of the machine will get hot. Aluminum is a really good conductor of heat, so it'll get hot. But the really good thing is that means it's taking heat away from the source and dissipating it out into the world. However, there are a few concerns. We noted that on the keyboard, temperatures go as high as 50 degrees in certain parts, and only the WASD keys really remain cool to the touch. Even the E key, which is right next to W, can get extremely hot and uncomfortable to touch after some point. After my own gaming run for 6 hours on this machine while benchmarking it was very difficult to use the keyboard. For example, it was difficult to press the F key while playing Hellblade, which is an action key in order to open doors. So by the time the door would open in the game, and if you've played it, you know it's a slow process, my finger felt like it was burning. So that is one issue that you have to absolutely be cognizant of. The second thing is in terms of thermal throttling. Now, does the system throttle? Well, yes and no. It will throttle if you're using this laptop in really hot weather. So for example, right now it is extremely hot, and if I was to take this outdoors in the summer sun and try and render something or play a game at very high settings, I will experience thermal throttling. However, if you're in an air-conditioned room like we are in right now, the ambient temperature is about 23 degrees. We did not see the CPU temps exceed 98 degrees. If you are not using an air conditioner, ambient temperatures will rise as the laptop expels heat, and overall, over a period of time, it feeds into how much hot the CPU runs. There was one particular instance where we noted the CPU temperature hitting 106 degrees, which is a degree higher than the TJ Max of the Ryzen 9 processor, but we did not experience any improper shutdowns or any warnings of some sort. So I would assume that was a momentary blip, and the system manages to hold its own. Overall, if you have good ambient temperatures, your ambient temperatures remain cool, and which is to say either the environment you're living in is a cold environment or you've got an air conditioner running, thermal throttling is not going to be an issue. However, there is one more aspect that prevents throttling, and that's Armoury Crate. Now, Armoury Crate is Asus's software to sort of set fan profiles, CPU performance metrics, GPU performance, etc. It offers 4 profiles. It offers a Windows profile, which basically lets Windows decide the power delivery to the components. There's Silent, which prioritizes low fan noise, in which case your CPU gets throttled down to a lower frequency. It'll probably not breach the 3.2 GHz mark basically. Then there is Performance, Turbo and Manual. We benchmarked several games across these 3 different profiles, which is with Performance, with Turbo, and in manual mode, all the fans set to run at their maximum speed at all times. Consistently, we noticed a jump in frame rates. Now, if, for example, with Shadow of the Tomb Raider, when played in performance setting, gave us an average FPS of 70 FPS, which is with 1080p and highest graphics. Then when we changed the setting from performance to turbo, we saw a gain of 2 FPS. And when we went from turbo to manual fans, all ramped up to 100%, we saw our frame rate jump up to 74 FPS. Now, obviously, with each of these performance settings, the system is giving more power to both the CPU and the GPU, which results in more heat, and therefore the fans run faster. When the fans are running in turbo mode, however, they do not reach their maximum speed. They only do so if you set them manually to run at full speed, and they get really loud. One of my colleagues who's sitting right there and staring into his phone blankly commented that he thought it was raining when the fans went up to their 100% speed. That's how loud it gets. Honestly, if you're gaming or watching a movie on system speakers and you have the fans running at 100%, good luck hearing anything clearly. The fans are really loud. Ideally, keep it to turbo, or if you've got headphones on, then of course turn it up to max. It ensures maximum cooling. It ensures maximum performance from your CPU and GPU. So of course, Armoury Crate in this regard is absolutely critical. Other area where it comes into play is battery life. Now on the G14, since this is a 2K panel, when benchmarking the battery, we got about 4 hours and 10 minutes in PC Mark 10 office test. It's a pretty commendable number, but that number is this high only because we had the system set to silent. If it was setting on performance or turbo, where the CPU and GPU can draw more power and the fans can run faster, the time would drop. Secondly, since this is a 2K panel, that's why the battery life is about 4 hours. If you were to choose a 1080p panel, I'm assuming you'd get about an hour or so more. Talking about the display, again, this is actually a really nice panel. We clocked a maximum brightness of 300 lux on our lux meter, and the brightness is consistent across the center and the four corners. Not only that, this is a Pantone certified display, which means that right out of the box, you have 100% color accurate sRGB representation. This is absolutely a treat for creators. If you're a photo editor or a video editor, or even if you're a colorist, as long as you're working in 8-bit color space, this panel is absolutely perfect. It has very little glare. There is no reflection since it's a matte panel. So even if you were to work outdoors, it's bright enough to work outdoors, and it handles reflections very well. Next up is the keyboard, trackpad and I/O. The keyboard on the G14 is actually really nice. It feels right out of a Zephyrus machine. The travel is short. The key feedback is actually pretty sharp. The actuation distances are good, and if you were to type on this keyboard for long hours, you would actually pretty much enjoy it. Of course, this is assuming that you've not also been gaming, which makes the keyboard practically an induction cooker. In terms of the backlighting, you only get a white backlight, which in my opinion is kind of okay because, well, for example, in daytime, you don't want to use the backlight. You should not be using the backlight because when you have it turned on, it makes the keys actually much harder to see. The letters are harder to see. What is, however, about nice is that Asus gives you 4 extra dedicated keys, 2 for volume, 1 for muting your microphone, and 1 for Armoury Crate. It's nice to have these dedicated keys, to be very honest, because when you're in game changing the volume and maybe wanting to mute yourself if you're in an online session and somebody unexpectedly breaks into your room and you need to have an unpleasant conversation, at least you're not embarrassing yourself with your online crew. The power button also doubles up as the fingerprint sensor, which feels a little misplaced in the socket, but it works just fine. So that's really nice. The trackpad, I feel, could have been much bigger. It's fairly small, it's usable, it's functional. I'm using an external mouse anyway, but what it does well is the fact that since it's made out of glass, it's really nice to the touch, and it's using precision drivers, which means all your gestures, Windows-based gestures, work absolutely fine with it. Last but not the least, you have the port selection. You have 2 USB 3.0 Type A ports on the right side, accompanied by a USB Type-C port with a maximum throughput of 10 gigabit per second. On the left, you have a full-size HDMI port and another USB Type-C port with DisplayPort connectivity. So overall, you could actually connect 2 additional external displays to the G14 and have your peripherals connected on the right side. Overall, it's a fairly standard set of ports. There is no Thunderbolt, of course, since this is an AMD based machine, but I frankly don't see why you would need anything more. You could use the Type-C port on the left side, which has a DisplayPort connector to connect other peripherals as well, like a hard drive or an USB extender, up to you. You shouldn't have any problems in that area. Now on to some of the more gimmicky features of the G14, and by that I mean this particular display, or rather this lid. Asus calls this the anime matrix panel, and as you can see, half of it has these LEDs playing on it, and honestly, it's really cool to have. No other laptop in the market right now has this, so it's a really eye-catching gimmick. You could have animations playing on this, you could have messages playing on it, you could put static images if you wanted, you could send secret messages, you could do whatever you wanted, and there's actually a fair bit of customizations available. You could also turn it off completely if you wanted in order to conserve battery, and that honestly I would recommend for sure. Overall, I think the novelty of this LED panel sort of wears off after some time, and it really doesn't contribute in any way to the gaming experience or the elegance factor. It's nice that you can turn it off, but if you want to save some money, just choose to go with the one with a laptop without this LED thing. The non-LED version or the non-anime matrix version of the G14 still come with the same finish, where you have one half being smooth and the other half having this dotted rib-like finish. So that way it's still the same, but the only difference is you don't have the display, these mini LEDs inside of it. Now, in case you guys are wondering about the sound output of the G14, well, let me just put it this way. You're better off using headphones for most part. It has top firing speakers on either side. They're pretty loud, but they're not actually very clear. If you're watching an action movie or a show with a lot of loud sequences, things get muddled very quickly. If you're watching something like a sitcom though, you will be able to hear everything just fine. But when it comes to gaming, if you need precision sound, if you want to be able to hear your enemy's footsteps, etc., headphones is absolutely the way to go. Sound quality wise, it's average output at best. Let's quickly also go over the internal drive that's in the Zephyrus G14. This machine houses a 512 GB NVMe drive by Intel, and it actually has pretty impressive read-write speeds of 1740 and roughly 1700 Mbps respectively. However, this actually does not translate very well into the real world. For example, when we try to restore our massive games library, which is stored on an external SanDisk Extreme Pro 1TB SSD, what happens is when we paste our game folders from the SSD onto the internal drive, the copy speeds are pretty fast at the beginning, but then quickly drop off into the 80 to 90 Mbps range. This is because the faster portion of the SSD, the one with the SLC cache, fills up pretty quickly at around the 30 GB mark. After that, the copy speeds drop significantly, practically coming down to hard drive speeds. So during this copy, we see write speeds go all the way up to 600 megabytes per second, and it'll stay there for a bit and then drops off. This is around once about 30 gigs of data has been copied into the internal SSD, then we see that drop in speed. So right now, from a 75 gig data dump, we've already copied roughly 25 gigs, and there we see once it hits the 30 gig mark, the speeds drop noticeably. Now we're down to 90 Mbps, 90 to 100 Mbps roughly, and it'll stay that way for the rest of the copy process. So of course, while this is an SSD, and while when it comes to loading your games, loading Adobe Premiere, loading your creative applications, or even booting up Windows, you're not going to see this issue crop up at all. But yes, if you are moving large number of files, larger than 30 gigs roughly, then yes, you will have this problem of slow write speeds after a certain point. So that's something that you should definitely know. Last but not the least, you have the build and design. Now, this machine is milled out of aluminum, and it's actually very solid. The weakest point on this entire thing is probably the display, which of course for obvious reasons is a little on the thinner side, has flex, but the base itself is actually rock solid. The keyboard island uses a very thin sheet of aluminum, but still manages to hold up against me mercilessly beating against the keyboard as I type my review of the G14 in fact. So overall, the build quality is pretty solid. What is also really nice, and this is a design feature that actually helps the thermals, is the ergo lift hinge. Now, as you open the display, you see that the base lifts up by a few degrees. This allows the fans inside to suck in more air since they're lifted up from the flat surface. And because they're able to do so, there is actually far lesser restriction in airflow than you would see on a machine without a hinge like this. Otherwise, you normally need to prop the laptop up using something so that the fans have that clearance. This is something that Asus has been using on many machines now, so it's a tried and tested thing and it works. So to finally conclude this review, what does the Ryzen 9 4900HS powered G14 do well? This particular unit is actually great for creators who we don't need a high refresh rate panel for sure. Do we need 2K in a 14-inch display? Very, very debatable. Honestly, you don't. 1080p for this size is absolutely fine. The 60 Hz refresh rate does feel on the lower side, given that the hardware on this can push games to a much higher FPS. So you're probably better off choosing the 120 Hz panel in case you're looking for a G14 with gaming capabilities. So this can game as well, but a 120 Hz panel would just be better. Thermals really need to be managed. You need to be mindful of the profile you're setting in Armoury Crate when you're doing these performance tasks, because let's say if you want to render a 4K video and you set it to silent, you will never see your CPU go over 3.2 GHz. But switch that up from silent to turbo and you start seeing the CPU clock all the way up to 3.75 and actually stay above 3.2. Whereas in the silent mode, it starts hitting 3.07, 3.06. So you do see performance gains with a higher profile, and that's where Armoury Crate really comes in. It's super easy to carry around. It's fairly light, it's small, it fits in most bags, and in fact, you can carry it around in your hand without any problems. The design is super stylish. The port selection is fairly standard and very functional. The battery, honestly, I feel could have been better. 4 hours is still quite a lot for a gaming machine that has a 8-core 16-thread processor. Like, that is an insane number when you put it into that context. But if you're working and if you're a creator and you want to edit on the go, 4 hours may not be enough. You may need more. You may want more. So this has been a review of the Asus ROG Zephyrus G14. There's actually a whole lot more to talk about this laptop, which we'll cover in our text review. We'll be covering this up in some of our following videos as well. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below and I will get back to them personally. Thank you guys for watching this video, and as for me, I'm going to see you in the next one.